Okay, ladies and gentlemen, as someone just tweeted, here it goes once again. Well, I have to say that very happy to see all of you here in the lecture hall, and of course as well via internet watching this live feed concerning on today's lectures. And I also have to say that this is my privilege to welcome two excellent speakers. I can say that also in beforehand here today. First, our speaker will be Mr. Steve Purser, who comes from ENISA, and Steve is the head of the Core Operations Department in ENISA. And ENISA stands for European Union Agency for Network and Information Security. And the other speaker is, I think we all know him, Mikko Hyppönen, who is the Chief Research Officer in Finnish F-Secure. And as said, our theme today will be the current situation of cybersecurity here in Europe. And as discussed and presented in the first lecture, when we are talking about cybersecurity in today's reality, as well as in the world, in Europe, in Finland, this is a very strategic issue. And I think this is one reason why I'm very eager to hear what Mr. Purser and Mikko Hyppönen has to say today on this subject when we are talking about from the strategic point of view the European cybersecurity. And as discussed also last time, this is getting more strategic. And also when we talk about cybersecurity, we understand as a starting point that the security in the digitalized world is both a necessity and enabler. And I think one of the issues what we will hear this evening here today is the last point of my slide, that cyber arms race is in a way accelerating. Meaning two ways, not only that the nation states are creating more and more powerful and sophisticated cyber capabilities, but especially the continuous race between the defenders and attackers, whatever the motive of the attackers are. So we are talking very strategic issue here. But then, of course, at the same time, we are talking about issues where the technology and this digital reality is more or less around us. I just heard that more than 1 million Finns, for example, are using at the moment this kind of health wearable, collecting data, measuring how much you walk, how much you run, how you sleep, or even what kind of mood you have. But how often we actually ask that what is the privacy policy or the security of these issues? Little by little, I have noticed that the vendors have started to present these kind of privacy policies, which I think this is pretty good idea. We know how our data is being used. And we also have noticed that there are already some insurances with health wearables, as one example, meaning that the more you move, the less you pay for your insurance. Well, as you know, people can be innovative also in this sense. Well, next it's my privilege to ask Mr. Steve Purser from ENISA, who comes from Greece. And even if you came now here in Finland, pretty dark and rainy, I see you smiling, and I think that's a very good starting point to have your lecture. Most welcome here in Finland and Aalto University, and very eager to hear your presentation. Please.
Well, this is great. It's great to see so many people and so many young people. because it shows, I think, that cybersecurity is interesting. And I think it's one of the most interesting areas you can be in IT at the moment. And let me start my talk by saying that we're going to cover a lot of stuff today, hopefully, if I do my job correctly. And what you read in textbooks gives you the idea that this is all solved. It's not. Not even the traditional stuff is solved. Let me give you an example. If you're managing access rights for a very large company, let's say you have 3 million employees, let's say you have, no, 3 million employees, sorry, 3,000 employees, let's say you have 300 Unix servers, a mainframe, and goodness knows what, you can use groups, you can use profiles, you can use what you like. It's still a really tough job. What you normally do is you go for less granularity, more control. So the stuff you read in textbooks is not necessarily how you do things in real life. And I think it's great to have young people thinking about these problems, because when you look at things like the Internet of Things and vastly distributed objects, the scalability really becomes a major issue, as does the administration. Who does it, for instance? I'm going to come back to all these things later. So when I present stuff, it may sound obvious to you, but please challenge it and think about it. Some of the most interesting things seem obvious, but aren't. Right, sorry, I think we have to get my presence. So you see, even getting the presentation really is not that obvious. Okay. Are you okay? Not yet. All right, I'll read from my slides as we get it going. I want to take you through several things today. First of all, I want to talk to you about threats and risks, and I'm going to talk about the ENISA threat landscape. Then I want to talk about the economic perspective of security. And I did this because I could talk to you about policy, but that's pretty boring. I'm not going to inspire you with policy. It's really important, and we have to do it, and it changes your lives, but it doesn't inspire people. So let's start with the economics first. Let's move on to the policy. And then I'm going to look at some key things that ENISA thinks is happening in the European market space. It's our view on things. It's the way we think things are moving. Okay, so hopefully that'll be interest to you. And then I'll finish up with some examples of how ENISA works, what we do, and how we manage to get impact. But before I launch into the threat landscape, let me do a test. What's the difference between threat and risk? Anyone know? Don't be shy. Please.
A threat does not have the possibility of a positive outcome.
Right, it's the fact that with a risk, you have the threat, the probability, and the impact. So threat is a part of what a risk is. Now, as we're waiting, you see, when you develop software, if you're developing stuff like Office software or stuff which is for general utilization, you can deal in terms of threats, but not so much risks, because this stuff could end up anywhere. You know, it might be in a SCADA company, it might be in a bank, it might be in some other kind of institution. So mostly we deal with threats. When we can, we deal with risks. I'm babbling on here because I'm waiting for the technology to stabilize. Are we okay? All right, let me give you another thing to think about. When you think about information security, how many of you think about technology? Most of you probably, right? What are the two other important elements of information security solutions? It's not all technology, is it? Or is it? What three things, and maybe you can think of other three things, make up a good solution in terms of information security? Technology, people, what's the third one? Process. Keep that trio in your mind, because we quite often get it wrong. Even the best get it wrong. You know, you tend to focus on one thing, and you miss the other two. And the solutions that work combine all three successfully. But now I can launch into my proper discourse, so we'll come back to these things later. So let's have a look at the threat landscape. Now I can't see it on that screen, so I'm going to have to look up, but that's all right. No. Are we okay?
Absolutely.
All right. I think we sort of proved my point that this was not interesting stuff, right? Not easy stuff. Yeah, it was working 2 minutes ago. It's software decay. Okay, let's start with threats. So just to let you know that ENISA produces every year something which we call the ENISA threat landscape. And please go and look at it. Everything on our website is totally free. And the way we do it is quite interesting. We don't do any threat analysis whatsoever. We go right the way through the world, and we get everyone else's threat analyses, and we put them together, and we kick out the stuff that people doesn't agree with, and we put the stuff together that people do agree with, and then we tailor it to individual business segments. So I think, and the echoes I get from the community, this is a very nice piece of work, and it helps people. So based on a large amount of data, over 380 reports analyzed, what came out of it? I'm just setting the scene here. So the good news from last year's report is that we have, I'm going to have to read this off here, I'm afraid, orchestrated actions to take down malicious infrastructure. This is good. That's not good. That's bad. We need to go back one. Okay. I think we're there. Strengthening of governmental awareness, cyber defense expenses, capabilities, and level of cooperation among states. So basically the core message is people are getting alert to this stuff at last. It's really important. It underlies everything else we do in life. Many developments in threat intelligence, proliferation of information sharing, etc. Now let me test you again. I go to conferences and everyone says we should be sharing more information. I totally disagree with this. We should be sharing less information, but it should be geared towards a result. Yeah, there's too much information out there. Bruce Schneier made the statement, we're in an era of data pollution, and he's dead right. When you share information, make sure that it gives you something, that is geared towards a goal. Just sharing information like that is generally not so good. Can act against you. And then we have research and development to accommodate change of the cyber threat landscape. So there's some good stuff going on in research, basically. What's the bad news? Well, we're seeing persistent attacks based on hardware, which are below the radar of most solutions. They'll catch up. We always catch up. But this is the latest thing we're seeing. And it's hardware-based stuff. Don't ask me for the details. I'm afraid I don't have it. Please look up the report and you'll get the details. We see cybercrime as a service. So malicious software as a service has been there for years. You know, the kind of development methodologies that the people are using are industry standard. And this is tough stuff. I started the first half of my career developing code, and getting that right requires a lot of good procedure, tools, and control elements. It's there. Highly efficient malware weaponization and highly profitable operation of malicious infrastructures and malware campaigns to breach data and ransom. So this is bad stuff. And in general, a lot of good stuff is going on, but we're still behind the curve, let's be honest. Okay? So this is what it gives you in the report. You will get the top 50, well, here's the top 10. It actually gives you the top 15 technical threats. And it maps them in the report to various business segments, and it shows you the way they're evolving. So if you see the data here, you see that botnets are going down, exploit kits are going down, the rest is going up. And as you can expect, most stuff goes up. Bear in mind, however, and here's another message, when you look at data about information security, be very careful. It may not be predictive. It quite often is not predictive. Where we have learned big lessons in the past in information security is often through black swan events, which are unusual events which crop up and change. It's a paradigm shift, if you like. Data is also very tricky because you may say, look at all these incidents. They're increasing all the while, but we're also measuring more. We have a lot more people measuring, so of course they're increasing, yeah? So be careful with data. You can tell many stories with data. They're not all true. I'm not saying don't look at data either, but consider it critically. This is what I want to talk about today. That was just to warm you up. What we think is happening in the industry today is that if we were here 20 years ago, we would have been talking about risk, mitigating risk, okay? And that's where we would have stayed. I did it. I was in loads of these conferences, and that was where you stayed. But that's only half the equation. You know, if you take a risk, you do it for a reason. Like if you cross the road, you want to get to the other side for some reason, right? You don't take risks for nothing. So life is not about risk. It's about balancing opportunity and risk. And this is fundamentally important because still quite often we miss this. And in Europe, quite often we tend to be very, very cautious. And there's a huge opportunity cost for that. I'm going to come back to this because what we are saying as an agency is do good risk management. Don't be over pessimistic. Cover your risk, cover the legal stuff, cover the regulatory stuff, but use security as an enabler. This is one of my main messages today. Security is a fantastic enabler. It's under everything we use, and it's one of the biggest barriers to Europe adopting the latest technologies. So let's look at this. These are McKinsey slides, by the way. We did some work with them, so I give them the credit for producing them. Some of them are taken also from other sources. But look at the growth rates. 33% compound annual growth rate. 27. This is huge. These things are moving very fast. So, this is a sign to us that we need to be getting faster in everything we do. This is what's happening in terms of security challenges. You may disagree with details. It doesn't matter. Look at the big picture. Look at the bottom line there. Next, 3 billion digital citizens. Mobile technology, natural user interfaces. These are big numbers. Lots and lots of money behind this, and we in Europe are suffering, economically. So again, my message is we need to get cybersecurity aligned with the economy, do the risk protection well, but also use security as a business case. So this is what the market looks like. If you look at cybersecurity spend as a fraction of GDP, well, North America is ahead, we're a bit in the middle, Latin America, Asia Pacific, and Middle East are a bit lower. Cybersecurity market, approximately 20.1 billion, growing at 6% CAGR. It's pretty healthy, but growing more slowly than in other regions, 8% in other regions. So again, we may lose a valuable piece of the pie. 640 billion of opportunity costs, value at risk. That's huge. Yeah? We cannot afford to lose this kind of opportunity. All due, it's theoretical, of course. Yeah? You can question it, but probably order of magnitude is about right. We need to be able to get into these spaces, these new areas, these technological developments in time to make sure that European businesses compete well on the international market. Some do, of course. We have some great examples, but we don't have enough of them. And I'll justify that statement in a minute. Here's our maturity level, pretty good. So we do match up when we do things, yeah? And here's the estimates on how IT-sec professionals are going to grow, 6%, again, very healthy. And if you look at the kind of skill sets we're looking for, that's also very interesting. If you're looking for a good career, you could do a lot worse, I think. But these are tough careers because this business moves very fast and it's a lifelong learning process. I've been in security for over 20 years. I'm still learning very techie stuff, even though I'm a pure manager these days. Because if I don't understand what my team are doing, I can't even understand the questions, and that's not good. So could grow the workforce by up to 3 million jobs, sorry, 300,000.3 million jobs in 2018. So again, we're talking some very interesting opportunities here. And finally, I think this is my final slide, or one of them. We're actually more concerned about cybersecurity than the rest of the world, which is good, I think. Again, it's not good, though, if it stops us advancing, if it stops us doing innovative stuff, if it stops us trying things out, learning and capturing markets. This is my last slide. We really think that traditional information security doesn't really hack it anymore. Yeah? I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's changing, and we need to change with it. Let me give you the example again of the Internet of Things. Yeah? So we have millions of objects all over the place. Quite often, the design methodologies of these kind of distributed networks have interesting things in there, like the user doesn't need to know where the object is. Perfectly true. But what about the security administrator? What about if that object is in China and it's got your data on it? What's the prevailing law? What are your rights as a citizen? What are your privacy rights? Yeah, for instance, so jurisdiction of data. Do you know where the stuff is? Can you control it? Who controls the cryptographic keys? It's complex stuff. And then think, everyone's saying Internet of Things is the future. It's not, it's today. It's going in your houses as we speak. Who's administering it? Are you going to administer your light bulb, your fridge, your radiator, your kettle? These are all things which need to be sorted out. It's the scalability issue, the manageability issue, yeah? So, core message is, don't be frightened by that. This is a great opportunity. And the people who solve these problems will be very successful. And we've always solved them in the past. Sometimes there'll be difficult trade-offs. Probably we will not be able to have the comfort zone we had before in terms of risk versus protection. But that's Once the automobile came into place, we had new risks, but we learned to live with them. So it's a changing world, and there are three ways you could react to this. One is you could sort of muddle on into the future. That's not very good. You don't get very good results if you do that. You can be extremely cautious and get a big backlash, in which case you suffer everything and you don't get the economic benefits, or you can embrace it. I'm asking you to embrace it. It's the challenge. You know, we have the right ideas, but how do we adapt them to a rapidly moving world, new technologies, vastly different scales, etc.? That's the challenge for you as young people to solve these problems. And they're very practical sort of problems. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about ENISA. So that's the data, if you like. I'm going to give you some statements about what we believe. Feel free to challenge me if you don't like it. I'm fine with that. But I think it makes a lot of sense. We believe that the European Union needs to become the single market of preference for governments and industry where cybersecurity is concerned. That's our goal. We are certainly not there at the moment, far from it. Think about products you buy at the moment and where they come from. We are losing. The EU should seek to achieve a reasonable balance between strong ethical principles and effective business practices. So it's great to say that people's data should be secure, private, etc. And we're the first to buy into these concepts, of course. They're very important. But you don't get a free lunch. So there's a balancing act here. And you know, when you look at the General Data Protection Regulation, which is coming up soon, this balancing act is going to be very important. EU needs an industry policy approach to create a competitive EU-based ICT security. So we need to package this and make sure cybersecurity is supporting everybody else. We believe we can support this process. Some issues, just to get you thinking about things. Current attempts to improve NIS throughout the EU, NIS, Network and Information Security, don't achieve an optimal balance between opportunity and risk. Yeah? Which means that we pay too much. Example, companies have very high operational costs, OPEX, because we have very heavy controls and we set the bar very high. Quite often, maybe we set the bar too high. You know, if companies want to have whiter than white security policies and be seen to be doing the very best, that limits what you can do in taking risks. Ironically, it can lead to a situation where you're paying the auditor all your money to prove that you're doing this thing, when in reality, you're taking risks because you have to do business. So it's a bit of a paradox there. Internal market for security products and services is not functioning correctly. It's a supply push market. The way things work in real life is that someone like IBM or Microsoft or one of these other big companies will bring out a product, and then you'll get people saying, should I have one of these? Well, that's entirely the wrong way to think, of course, yeah? It should be the demand that is driving the supply, but it's not, honestly. Look at the way things are happening. We are not organizing our demand so that we are powerful enough to move the market. I've seen this many times, intrusion detection systems. Someone actually came up to me, 20 years ago, whenever it was, and said, should I have one? I said, well, you tell me, do you need one? So it's the wrong approach. It's supply push where it should be demand pull. Privacy and data protection, changing. We've been talking legal things, principles, etc. Very important. But how do we implement it? What does it look like on a machine? Where's your private data? Can you come in the morning and see a big green circle and you think, that's great, all my private data is secure. And then you plug into the internet and that circle goes half red. And then you think, oh, maybe I need to do something. Then you log onto your bank account and it's 3/4 red. You get the idea. You have nothing like that. You have no tools to see what privacy and data protection means for you. That's the challenge. Let me also say there's a massive risk here in Europe because we have such a heavy set of legislation and such high penalties that every time something happens, people might be running to the courts to sort it out. We definitely don't want that. We want to have something a lot more clear, such as technical baselines or whatever, things which can show that you're doing a good job to help you protect you from litigation. This is really important. Current EU research and development activities do not give rise to enough successful services and products. We have great ideas which quite often sit on the shelf. Yeah? Whether it's national, Europe, whatever. But particularly in Europe sometimes, in the past at least, we've had scientists come together, create a great thing, then they all go home to their member states. If you want to make a product out of this thing, who do you call if it goes wrong? Yeah? So the innovation component, making systems work, taking those ideas and putting them in the real world is really important. Cybersecurity standardization and certification activities are not sufficiently aligned with modern needs of the industry. So standards should be helping industry, should be industry driven. Yeah? And we are sometimes losing even this battle because the US is very good, for instance, at getting standards into ISO. Once something has an ISO standard, you've got a worldwide standard. So you're one step ahead in terms of selling your products. We need to be faster. We need to get our standards into this game as well. It's not as vast as them, by the way, but because we're losing a little bit, I have to paint it a bit like this. What we want is a level playing field. We want Europe to be highly competitive. Knowledge and skills. It's great that you're all here today. It's really great. We need more of this. And we need to have knowledge and skills from the moment you go to school right to your last dying day. And it needs to be better planned. If you look at training skills in cybersecurity, a great number of them are geared towards CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers. But you don't get many CISOs. I was a CISO for 20 years, but it took me 20 years to get there. That can't be right, can it? Well, it's more or less right. You get the picture, yeah? So education in cyber needs to cover far more than the CISO. It needs to cover many positions in industry, and we need a broader range of training for a broader range of activities. The CISO thing is quite interesting. It also tends to sort of tell companies that, hey, this guy has the right training, he can become a CISO. Well, that's a bit like saying you can have 17-year-old generals. You don't get many of those around. It's because what you need to be a good CISO is experience. A lot of it is soft skills, persuasion, understanding the politics, understanding how people think, talk, act, etc. So a lot to do here. And then we think as an agency that we can better help coordinate this across the European institutions. So some key messages, just let you read through them quickly. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll pick out one or two perhaps. Business models is a great opportunity for Europe. Let's think about business models that make good use of security. It could be a fantastic enabler. Yeah? We don't see that many business models which exploit good security practices. We believe we could see more. We don't see sectorial requirements for information security, which is a shame because if you have sectorial requirements, you have enough mass, critical mass to move the market. Then it's not a supply push market anymore. Then people have to listen to you. If you represent a whole industry segment, you can move things. This is really interesting. Invest more in awareness and education, reduce operational expenditure by good risk management. You may say, surely we're doing that. Actually, we're not. We still, it's varied. Some companies do a really good job. Some companies still tick the boxes and follow the compliance path, etc. That's sort of wasting money in many ways. It's certainly not the approach of the future anyway. I just mentioned Basel II. Who's heard of Basel II here? So it's an agreement in the financial world, very clever. What it says is, it says to banks, you can manage operational risk how you like. We don't care. But if you don't prove to us you're managing it well, we're going to make you block all this money to one side and you can't spend it. So that if there's a risk, you have to pay for it. But if you do it well, you can unblock all that money and spend it. What do you think the banks do? They do good risk analysis. Yeah? Because they want to use that money to make money. So, there are good ways of getting people to do things. Same with insurance policies, reducing the premium to ensure that people do good cybersecurity. Okay, and then there are many others. I'll leave you with the slides because I don't want to go ad infinitum on this particular subject. Let me tell you briefly what's happening in cybersecurity and regulation, because this is still important stuff, even if it's not so sexy. But my key message is the future is balancing opportunity and risk in a much cleverer way in cybersecurity. But let's look what policy and regulation is doing. So first thing is there's lots of this stuff. Lots of regulations, lots of policies, and the danger is that we trip over each other a little bit or we become incoherent. Actually, that's not happening. It's well controlled. I picked out 3 things which you should definitely know about in terms of what's happening in Europe. Cybersecurity strategy of the EU, very nice document, sets out in 5 action lines a lot of things which definitely need to be done and are being done. We booked a lot of progress on this. I'm not going to tell you, I'll leave you to look that up. Proposal for an ENISA directive, this is hugely important. It's the first piece of legislation in cybersecurity in Europe. It's just been agreed. It will be formally adopted in a couple of months. ENISA plays a big role in this. And this is stuff which countries have to do, mainly related to critical infrastructure like electricity grids, SCADA systems, banking systems, etc. But it's important in itself because it represents a shift in thinking. And then the general data protection regulation, for me, is the big one. Because if we get this wrong, we will kill business. Yeah? If we don't get a reasonable way of protecting private data, we'll be in a litigative society, filling in forms for a while, we will not get value for money. So it's a great piece of legislation, but it needs to be transposed into practical stuff, which we can do on a day-to-day basis without too much hassle. Let me put it like that. Yeah? It should be relatively intuitive. So, as I said, 5 strategic objectives of the strategy. Achieving cyber resilience is where the ENISA directive comes in. There's also a nice action defined along the lines of industrial and technological resources for cybersecurity. If you have time, take a look at it, because there are some interesting things in there, and it shows you what Europe is doing. It's a nice basis. The ENISA directive is all about setting what they call a high common standard for cybersecurity across the EU, which means, of course, absolutely nothing. Yeah, we have to interpret it. And that's where the fun comes. Because if we get it wrong, and if we have, one country up here and another down here, then that's not going to bring a very good result. Of course, we're in a global world, so you could say it doesn't really matter. But it matters to a certain extent because we have a lot more interaction within Europe. And so common procedures, common approaches, etc., again, bring strong economic value. And they actually bring coherence. Yeah, so it means that you're all rowing the boat in the right direction, which is a large part of security. Not going to go through all these points. Again, just soak it in, I would say. Our role in this, and this is our role in general, for those of you who don't know ENISA, we work together with public and private sector, and we are facilitators. So I have a team of around 55 people. It's not very big. My people are sort of experts in their own right, but where they are really expert is bringing together communities to make common decisions. And if you think about it, if we're going to do things to European scale, that's how we have to work, and that's how we do work. Almost everything we produce is not only our work, it is our work. So people like yourselves are involved in it, which brings 2 things. Scalability. Instead of having 55 people, I suddenly have 500 or whatever. And it brings ownership. If you are involved in working with us, it's your work too. So we get buy-in and we get people, happy with this stuff. So it's a nice operating model. This is exactly what we're going to be doing for the directive. Talking to people, sorting out common solutions, making sure that people are in agreement with what they're implementing so that it will really work. And the problem with obligatory measures is if you do it wrong, you get the lowest common denominator. You get the minimum. We don't want that. We want something that is really effective. GDPR, I have one message for you. Very demanding. Probably we're setting the bar far higher than most of the rest of the world, which is great. Now we have to make it work, which is process, people, and technology, and people, process, technology. All has to be there. Yeah. Stakes are very high. I think that penalties go up to 4% of turnover, if I'm not wrong. Turnover is not your profit. That's how much you earn. It's a huge figure. So again, we need to make this stuff practical. And where ENISA can come in, it's helping people find practical solutions to these problems, because we deal with security controls on a daily basis, and that's what people are going to be using on the whole to implement privacy. It's not too dissimilar to the concept of confidentiality, right? Similar. Okay, so just a few words about ENISA. This I already gave you an overview of, so this is our operating model, yeah? And the interesting thing is the communities are at the middle. These are the ones that do all the work. So we work hand in hand with other people, as I say, very similar to yourself. If we don't mobilize you, if we don't get you to give us your good ideas, we don't do much, yeah? It's really important that people participate. So our job is getting the participation. 3 types of work. At the bottom, you see recommendations. These are papers. Papers are great, but you can write the best paper in the world. You're not sure anyone's going to read it. And if they read it, you know this story. You're not sure they've understood it. If they've understood it, are they going to do anything? If they do anything, is it going to work? It's a long way from impact, right? So it's nice to do papers. And some of these papers are good, and I'm very proud of my team for having produced them. But I would like to see us closer to where things happen. working really very closely on the field to find out, why this stuff doesn't work. Because it looks great on paper, but somehow it doesn't work in real life. So that's where we need to get a bit better. And if you go around this clock sort of counterclockwise, the second is actually much closer to this kind of work, and the third is really hands-on. So let me give you a couple of examples to end my intervention, because I promised I'd stick to half an hour. Here's something we did in finance. So I come from finance. I was 18 years as a chief information security officer in various financial institutions. Really interesting business, going from very little risk to $10 trillion of custody risk. So I saw a whole range of things, and that's what's hiding behind this. Because in finance, you can pay for a book for Amazon, which is a few euros, and at the other end of the scale, interbank transfers are typically 100 million euros a day, perhaps. So the authentication mechanism you use needs to be adapted to the risks that you're taking. And that's not obvious, actually. And there's another factor here, of course, is that your users be comfortable with this authentication mechanism. I've got a device which I use for my home banking. I don't like it a lot. It's a bit clunky. But OK, I can sort of understand why it's there. It'd be nice if it could be less clunky. So here, what we did was we got together with the industry, and we mapped various payment methods to various authentication methods. And we tried to find the best benefit in terms of reduction in risks, cost, and also satisfaction of users. Please have a look. It's quite interesting. And it shows you some of the kind of discussions which go on, and how at the end of the day, we come to compromises which are optimization. And a lot of security is about that. It's about optimizing things. Not getting the best security, because then you'll probably be paying too much money. You don't want to pay 1,000 euros to protect an orange. You don't want bad security either. It's really about optimization. This we did with some of the world's best cryptographers, Bart Prenell's group in Leuven and the University of Bristol. We took over an old EU research project, and it's all about algorithms and key lengths. Yeah? So it gives you a guideline on the way things are going and what is considered secure and not secure. But I spent most of my career in cryptography, PKI. This is all good stuff. But actually, in cryptography, where we see the most problems is the implementation again. Yeah? It's the procedures and the practices needed to keep keys safe, for instance, use of tamper-resistant equipment, hardware security modules, how you split up the keys, what the concept is like, does the key get swapped to the swap file, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, yeah? So it's good to get the maths right, but it's even more important in everyday life to get the implementation right. If my memory serves me correctly, the Sky TV box was cracked. It had brilliant cryptography, but someone found a way of introducing a device between the contacts of the crypto module and the device. So it was broken by a simple hardware technique. I think that's correct. Okay, that's an example of papers. Security data and breach notification, two hugely important concepts. So please think about this. This you see happening worldwide. The SEC in the States did this a couple of years ago. Korea's been doing it for ages. It's a worldwide concept. Two different things. Security breach notification is telling someone when you've been penetrated or breached or whatever, under whatever conditions. Yeah? Simple as that. Data breach is a lot more complex. This dates from an old Californian state bill, which basically said that, hey, if you're holding my data and you get breached, I should know about this. So this is all about protecting other people's data. Yeah? And the procedures are different. So here you have to notify data protection authorities, etc. So security breach, data breach. Whatever kind of breaches they are, and NIST's take on this is that we don't want thousands of different procedures. So we try, and there are a lot of these things proliferating now, we try and get a maximum of commonality so that business pays the minimal price and gets the optimal value. It's hard to do, actually, because they have different legal bases. But we did it for Article 13A, which is obligatory in the telecoms framework. This was our first experience with implementing this stuff. We used the same model for Article 4 of the Privacy Directive, which is a data breach notification. Article 19 of the IDAS, which is electronic ID. And now this new NIS directive wants to do it in a much greater scale, yeah? So our idea is let's use a common template. Let's try to do the same thing so that we get economies of scale, coherence, interoperability, etc. So it makes sense when you put it like that, but unfortunately the machine doesn't always work in that way. Now, let me ask you a question. When this first happened, some people didn't think it was worthwhile doing. So, another security breach, etc. We found it was. We got some really interesting results. So let me ask you, and if you know the answer, don't put your hand up. What do you think is the biggest risk affecting telecoms in Europe from an availability perspective? Any idea? Is it malware, for instance? Cyber attacks? People? Any ideas? Okay, doesn't matter, you don't have to answer. It was actually quite surprising. Most people say cyber attacks or malware, or whatever, yeah? Not in this space. When you're in the telecom space, it's actually poorly written and poorly configured software. 45%. Simple as that. And we didn't really know that until we ran this study. So it's very interesting because even the experts learned something. And here's what it looks like. So these are the sort of percentages. So system failures is the highest. This is the last 3 years, yeah? Well, last 4 years, actually. So you can see system failures due to this badly configured and badly written software really high. Malicious actions, very low in this particular area. Of course, if you go to banking or something like that, you're going to see a totally different picture. But we're talking about telecoms now. Natural phenomena, 12%, 6%, 14%. So you see, doing this kind of stuff actually can be interesting. And I talked about data and how it can be misleading, but here, this is telling a fairly obvious story. And when we sat down and thought about it, we thought, yeah, of course, that's what's happening. So data breach and security breach notification can bring about some interesting stuff. Here's another view on it. This is what the impact on services looked like. And again, we found fairly common patterns in what we were seeing. So whether you do it voluntarily or obligatory, this is a bit of a distraction in a way. You need to do it as the message because this data is actually very useful. And then my final example is the Pan-European Cybersecurity Exercise, which is probably our sexiest project. I was on this from day one. It was really great watching it grow. It comes out of a 2009 Commission communication, and really the member states really saw the power of this straight away. It was actually in a meeting in Tallinn where this thing was launched, and we got 18 months to do the first one, which sounds like a lot of time, but it's really not for a pan-European exercise. But hats off to the member states who did this. They did it. And now, we're so many exercises later, this is a very sophisticated thing. So what's it all about? We simulate cyber attacks over a period of several days now, spread over the year, and we watch how communities sitting at their desks in their home countries react and communicate and deal with it. So we look at people, process, and technology. And we look at what works and what doesn't work, and why not. So it's absolutely not a desktop exercise. It's really a playing exercise where the planning takes over a year. I would say the planning cycle is about 18 months, and the execution cycle is about 6 months. And we have industry now. We have a wide variety of players. It's really interesting stuff. And I think this is a great way to be going. The other side to this, incidentally, from a public perspective, is that it's sometimes very dangerous to just do policy development top down, because the risk is you get disconnected from reality. Well, here's an example where we do something bottom up. We say, hey, let's play this game. Let's find out how it really works, and then we can tell the policymakers what they should be doing. And let me leave you with an example where this didn't happen, okay, and where it causes problems. I see cryptography coming into legislation. Most legislators know nothing about cryptography. That's problematic. Expectations are high. I used to run, my team actually ran the national PKI for Luxembourg, so I learned a lot about doing this kind of stuff. It's expensive. You need very good skill sets. You need to be really on the ball. You need to know exactly what you're doing. It's a tough call. That's good if you're doing a small thing like a PKI for a distinct community. But if you're saying do it for everything, I don't see how this is going to work, to be quite honest. Yeah. So I think we are in a discussion with the Commission saying, yeah, use cryptography, but be careful how you use it. If you make it obligatory, understand the consequences, what it will cost, etc., how it will be done. And I think if you do it in that sense, and this is definitely the way we are moving, then it's fine. Then you get, policy which is developed with eyes open and everyone knows what the consequences and the expectations are, and you get a good result, hopefully. And that's it. So thank you very much for your time. I left a little bit of time for questions. I hope it was a bit interesting. I tried to touch on many different aspects of what we're doing. Thank you. Did I shock anyone? No? That's good.
Hey, one question quickly. We are talking about quite a lot nowadays, cybersecurity here in Finland. And in our cyber strategy from the 2013 states that we are aiming to be the global forerunner in cybersecurity in 2016, this year. I would like to ask you, especially from your point of view, coming from the Central Europe, how you see the current cybersecurity situation, where Finland stands. I would say both from the industry point of view, but also from the society's point of view, how well we are doing. What do you think?
Well, I never benchmark countries because it gets a bit ridiculous. So I'm not going to compare against others, but I will say I think Finland has a lot of good cybersecurity going on. Yeah, I mean, you have some very successful companies. One of them is going to talk after myself, of course. You have a lot of good security experts. You have a culture which is encouraging good security, which is not always the case. And I think you've seen, as a country, you have certainly seen the value of cybersecurity and where it can lead you. Now, that's great. That's getting out of the starting blocks as far as, the country itself is concerned. The big challenge is how do you capitalize on all this? So, we need to create a market. And that means changing some fairly big perceptions. So I don't know, I'm not well enough acquainted with Finland, but I think when I look at Europe in general, we are quite cautious as people. And we require a lot of guarantees before we do things. And I think sometimes, you need to play with things, you need to see what happens. Of course, you can't take ridiculous risks, but I think we need to develop in younger people the ability to innovate. And let me tell you very quickly why this is not happening. I go to school for my kid who's doing maths, and he got this problem right, but he didn't do it the right way. Does that make sense? I mean, we say you have to do it this way. I can sort of understand this, right? But in fact, we should encourage people to be different and to try things. And the problem with the way we learn things is you get things wrong and you get punished for it. Whereas you should say, okay, you got it wrong this time. What have you learned from it? What are you going to do different next time? So it's a very, very deep thing to change a culture, to change a way of doing things. And I could give you lots of examples. We carry a lot of social baggage with us. I don't have time to do that. I used to ask a riddle to people and everyone gets it wrong. And it illustrates superbly how even the best thinkers think within certain constraints. And that we need to get better at, I think. But myself as well, of course.
One more question, what I personally have to ask you. You are saying that we need credible European cybersecurity, especially for the digital single market. And as we discussed earlier, if we want to have a credible European cybersecurity, we have to have a credible European cybersecurity industry. What is your opinion? Is there already a credible European, including Finnish, industry in this field, or where are we heading to?
Well, there are some star players, of course. We have some very good examples of companies that have done well, and that's great. Is it credible as a European phenomenon? Not in my opinion, not yet. We have a long way to go. I mean, just think, you ask any person in the street, who's supplying them, they will come out with the same names. They won't normally be European names. Yeah. More's the pity. It doesn't have to be like that. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and it goes right down to education in schools, and it goes to the way we perceive things. But look, we had the ball for a while. I don't know if you remember, but there was a while when the US were cutting encryption keys down to 40 bits, which meant it was trivial to crack. And then we had companies like Baltimore come out. I don't know if you remember Baltimore, very successful, got very high. And then suddenly, nowadays we seem to have lost it a bit. And from an average perspective, we have some good players, but as Europe as a whole, we are not dominating the cybersecurity landscape, I would say.
Thank you. Other questions, comments, arguments? We can continue this also after Mikko's speech. Yes, just a second, I will give you the microphone.
Hello, thank you. So you said cybersecurity is much this three-way of technology, process, and humans. If we talk strictly about consumers, like everybody here, then I would say end consumers are notoriously bad at following process, which kind of negates one of those three aspects. How do you see that this affects, for instance, legislation and how we should approach this kind of issues that this arises from this?
I really think you're right, but process can be minimalistic and still very effective. I mean, look, when it comes to people as consumers, risk management needs to be intuitive. Let me give you an example of this. If you walk down the street tonight and someone comes up to you and says, hey, where do you live? How old are you? You know, what's your national security number or whatever? You're not going to tell him or her. You're going to say, whoa, hold on a second. Why are you asking me all these things? And yet people just push this stuff onto Facebook without thinking about it. They just give it away. Yeah? There was a great video done by a company in Brussels, and they set up a fortune teller in a tent in the middle of Brussels, and people came in and had their fortune told. And this guy was going, you've got 4 boyfriends. And you could see the girl going, wow. And your bank account number is blah, 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 blah. And people were falling off their seat. But of course, there was a team of people on Facebook behind just digging this stuff out. So I think to answer your question, we need a sort of electronic common sense. And it's not there yet, but it's getting better. When I look at my kids, they have learned through trial and error, they know what to do. And I've heard recently, for instance, that when people put their private data on sites that ask for it, more and more you get people putting dummy data because they don't want to do it. That's also a problem in some senses, yeah, but it shows that people are getting more savvy. So I think for you as consumers, risk handling should be intuitive. There's certain things you need to do procedurally. You need your antivirus, you need your firewall, you need the basics, but then it's just common sense. If you go and visit a porn site, you know, you're probably going to get infected at some moment. If you go and visit the normal sites, much less so. So it's all about adapting your behavior to the risks. And I think in the future, we cannot avoid that. The security will be much more in the hands of the users. But, you know, when the automobile came out, the first model was that someone walked in front of it with a red flag. Didn't last for very long. Not a very scalable mechanism, right? So we have to adapt. On the contrary, and that's my last statement, when you get to international cybersecurity, process is key. Process is where we go wrong. Technology is good. People are well clued up. But the processes for coordinating. So it's case by case. It really depends what communities you're dealing with.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you very much.
My name is Mikko Hyppönen. I am the Chief Research Officer for F-Secure Corporation. And F-Secure is best known for our software security products and our antivirus products, which we've been making for decades. But we have recently expanded into new fields. So in addition of doing security software, we also do nowadays consulting and auditing and penetration testing, which means you can hire us to break into your network, and then we will break into your network. Or you can even hire us to break into your building, and then we will break into your building. I recently had a chat with Tom, one of our guys who does this regularly, and he told me about this one gig he was doing for a Nordic bank. Because this bank hired us to break into their mainframe systems. And we did our initial study into the system, and we learned quite a bit about the network and about the mainframe, which was an IBM mainframe, about the network structure and about the people who ran it. Most of that was collected from LinkedIn. And we also got the credentials. The problem was that the only way to log into this network for the mainframe was to physically be in this one building in a capital of a Nordic country. So we had everything else we needed, but the problem was that to actually gain access to this mainframe network, you had to be physically inside a certain building. There was no outside connections, no remote connection. You had to be in one particular building, in one city, in a Nordic country. So Tom, our guy, tried to figure out a way how to get in. And while Googling for solutions, he saw that there was actually an event in that building, an event for briefing analysts and media about real estate prices in Northern Europe. So he signed up as a member of a media. And he made a really cheap fake press card that he was wearing, and he actually went to the meeting with a couple of other analysts and members of the media. And he sat through 2 hours of briefing on real estate prices in the Northern Europe, which he tells me is the most boring thing he's ever done in his life. Then he gave him a pile of paper, he thanked everybody, they left the meeting room, and then he asked the host that actually I would have to go and use the men's room. And he pointed him to the toilet, he went to the toilet, and then he just stayed there. He just stayed there. For 45 minutes, he was in the men's room. And then finally he gets out, and there's nobody there. Apparently the host, I don't know, got bored or got a phone call or whatever, but he wasn't there. Excellent. So now he was in the right building with nobody watching over. So he just walked around until he found an empty place. He sat down perfectly out in the open, wearing a suit, having his laptop, connecting to the network, connecting to the mainframe, logging in, taking screenshots. Mission accomplished. Everything's done. Excellent. Very good. But then he gets hungry. But hold on, I'm in the right building. I know where the mainframe is. It's in the basement. Why don't I go and take a selfie with the mainframe? That would be really cool, right? All right. So he starts going around the building, tries to find a way to get down to the basement. And as he's doing that, while he's going to a corridor, at the other end of the corridor, his host walks by. And this is now 3 hours later. Like he left him to the toilet 3 hours earlier. And Tom is like, ooh, trying to look at the other direction, but he sees him. And then he comes over and he's really confused. Like, well, how come you're still here? Like, I left you in the men's room 3 hours ago. How come you're still here? And Tom is that, well, you know, and then the host is like, did you get lost? Are you lost? Yes. Yes, I'm lost. And then the host explains that now I have to escort you out. Let's go. And they go and they get to the elevator. They wait for the elevator. And Tom thinks that, oh my God, this is stupid. I probably just have to tell him what happened. So he tells him that, you know, actually, I'm not lost. Actually, I'm from an outside company. I'm here to do a security audit. So that's why I'm here. And his host is like, oh, I see. All right, you have a good day. Bye-bye. And then Tom takes the elevator to the basement, goes to the mainframe, takes a selfie with the mainframe, and then leaves the building. So that's the kind of things that we do. Now, I'm a dinosaur with this company. I've been working with F-Secure for quite a while. Every month, when I get my employee payslip, it has this one field which says employee since. And that field on my payslip says 6/91. 91 stands for 1991, which means this June, I have worked for F-Secure for the last quarter of a century, for 25 years. And that's a long time to work in a single company. There are people in the audience who weren't born 25 years ago, and I worked there for 25 years, which means when I started working, this is what I was doing, analyzing viruses on 5¼ floppy disks. And I wanted to bring this up because the first PC virus just turned 30 years old. Brain.A, the first PC virus, is now 30 years old. And I've been saving all these old viruses that I used to analyze in the good old days. So we can actually show you a couple of examples on what it used to look like in the good old days. So I'm now executing DOSBox, the emulator that actually allows you to run old code on modern computers. Let me just mount a drive C, and then we can look at some old malware. So these are examples of the kind of malware that we used to analyze. That's the Frodo virus. On certain dates, it would actually overtake your computer and show you something like that. Or we have viruses like this one, the ambulance car. Or the infamous Walker virus. So many of the viruses in the early days were visual. You could actually see something happening on your screen. And the reason why I'm bringing this up right now is that we started a project last week on Friday together with the Internet Archive. Internet Archive, which archives old information on the internet, including full copies of the whole World Wide Web. One of the projects we started is an emulation archive of roughly 60 different old viruses. So what I'm doing right now is I'm running a web browser in which I'm running a JavaScript-enabled virtual machine of an MS-DOS system, which is executing a virus from 1991. And you can do this yourself. You can go to Malware Museum on archive.org, and it will give you a list of around 60 different viruses, including the Walker virus that we just saw, and many others. Now, my personal favorite, well, let me just show you Finnish sprayer because it's a nice Finnish virus from 1993. Displays you a message which asks you to send fax to a Finnish phone number. But my favorite one is this. It's the casino virus. Casino virus, which will take over your computer, and on 3 dates of the year, it will destroy all your files. The way it does this is that it will take a copy of your file allocation table, store it into memory, then overwrite the file allocation table on your drive, which means you've just lost all your files. They've just been overwritten. But now it lets you play a game with 5 credits. And if you actually win the game, it's going to write the file allocation table back to the hard drive. So you get your files back. Now, if you lose, it's just going to hang your machine, which means you lose because the table is already destroyed. If you don't play at all, if you just reboot, you automatically lose because it has already overwritten the file allocation table. The only good copy is in RAM, and it's going to write it back if you win. And we can actually play this for real. So if we have 5 credits, I'm actually going to play it now. If we get £5, we'll win. So let's try. Number 1, we got £1, but that's not good enough. Attempt number 2, no dice. Attempt number 3, nope. This looks really bad. And we have our last credit. Oh, we got £2, close. Last attempt, and we just lost our files. So I recommend you go and take a look at the Internet Archive's Malware Museum, available for everybody at archive.org. Now, like we just heard from Steve, Europe is regarding computer security issues sort of like in a crisis, which is sort of sad, considering that the World Wide Web was invented here in Europe. The World Wide Web was invented by Europeans here in Europe. It wasn't invented by Americans. But funnily enough, almost all the services we use are from the United States. You go and look at your browser history. Most of the sites you visit are from the United States of America. You might visit a couple of local media sites to get the local news, but then your social media systems, your searches, your cloud storages, everything else is from the United States, which is kind of sad, considering that the web was invented here, considering that there are more people in Europe than people in the United States, considering that our combined budget of the European countries is much larger than the combined budget of the United States of America, considering that we have far more internet users in Europe than in the United States of America. Still, we've lost. Name 5 large American software companies. That's not very hard, is it? Like, Apple, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, IBM, Netflix, Twitter. We could go on. That's not hard at all. Name 5 large European software companies. And then you run into problems. It's actually very hard to list European companies which would be in any way comparable in size and influence to those largest American companies. So clearly, we are failing. There is one large European software company. One, and that is SAP from Germany. They are European, they are very large. But beyond SAP, we have very few examples of success stories. We have successful European gaming companies, all right, and of course there is software. So we do have some part of success to ourselves, I guess. Now, if we think further about the world where we live in, it's kind of sad to see that Europe is failing to make a bigger dent in software business and a bigger dent in software security business, considering that we are living in the middle of incredible growth. We are living very, very exciting times. We're all so lucky to be alive during these crucial times when the world is changing so quickly. We have around 8 billion people on this planet. Those people have around 1.5 billion computers they use. 1.5 billion PCs. That's, you know, PCs and Macs and Linux workstations. That's a lot of computers. Except it's nothing when you compare it to the amount of iPhones and Androids which were sold last year. There was the same amount of smartphones sold in a year than what we've collected computers throughout the history. Just imagine the rate of change. And the computing power and the memory of a high-end smartphone is comparable to the processing power and memory of your computer from maybe 1 or 2 years ago. Very, very exciting times. We are living in the middle of developments where things like artificial intelligence could actually become a reality during our lifetime. And if that actually happens, that's going to change everything. But one thing in particular that's going to change, which is close to my heart, is computer security. Think about this. People keep asking me about how come we keep having these vulnerabilities. How come we can't write an operating system which would be completely secure? And I always give the same answer. The problem is that these programs are being programmed by human beings. Human beings make mistakes. We make mistakes all the time. We will always be making mistakes. And when programmers make mistakes, we call them bugs. And today, bugs in internet-connected software are more than bugs. They're vulnerabilities. So programmers make mistakes which turn into vulnerabilities which can be exploited by attackers. And we're never going to get rid of that unless we get rid of the programmer. So now imagine a guy who's writing a program to write programs. Those of you who do programming, you can sort of imagine writing a program which would write programs. Perfectly doable. It's going to write crappy programs, right? But if you keep doing it and honing it, making it better, eventually it's going to write better programs. And then you can see that one day it's going to be so good that one day it's going to write better programs than the programmer himself. One day we will reach a threshold. It might be 10 years, 20 years in the future, but it's going to happen. And when that happens, that is the last program we ever have to write. From that moment on, we don't have to write any programs ever because we no longer are the smartest programmer on the planet. Now there's a program which can write programs better than we could, including programs which write programs. So it's going to be explosive growth immediately once the threshold is met. Then it's going to skyrocket. And then it's going to make us more or less irrelevant, which is sort of sad. But it also means we're going to get rid of bugs, more or less. At least get rid of bugs that can be turned into vulnerabilities that we could figure out how to exploit. Even if there's bugs, they're too complicated bugs for us humans to understand. So that's going to change the face of computer security. It's going to change a lot of other things as well. It might lead to annihilation of the humankind and other things, but nevertheless. So I strongly believe that we, this generation, we here in the room, we only have 2 problems to solve. And granted, they are big problems. But those problems are the problem of security and the problem of privacy. If we can solve these 2 problems, we're good to go. Because we were given a free and open internet. That's what we all got. And the question is, what kind of an internet
will we be leaving to future generations? We got a free and open net. Will we be leaving a free and open net to our children? Or will it be something different? And these are the key questions. Whether we can solve security problems and privacy problems online. And in many ways, we might have already lost the fight for privacy. It might already be too late for privacy because we have already grown a generation of people who take it for granted that in the online world, you don't pay for anything with money. That in the online world, you're supposed to pay for content with your data and with your privacy. That's how it has always worked for them. They don't know any different. They assume that it's supposed to work like that. They assume that in the real world, if you want to go and buy a newspaper, you have to pay money. But in the online world, you don't pay with money, you pay with your privacy. That's how it's always worked. And that's kind of sad. This is not the way it has to work. It could have turned completely different. It could be that we would actually pay for content with money in the online world as well. But for many reasons, that never became a reality, and we ended up paying with our privacy. And now everybody takes it for granted, and now it might be too late to change that anymore. It might be that people don't want to change that anymore because they've learned it. We've told them that this is the way it works. I hope I'm wrong. I hope we haven't lost the war on privacy yet. But it doesn't look very good. The war on security is still very much going on. And the enemies that we fight in these two different fights are quite different. The enemies in the security world are criminals, organized online criminals who make money with their malware attacks and denial of service attacks. Our biggest enemies in the privacy war are companies. Companies that do nothing illegal when they collect our data and make massive databases about us and our preferences and our connections. Companies like Google and Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and on and on and on. So quite two different wars or fights are going on. So these criminals, online criminals who write malware and launch online attacks, what do they look like? Well, they look like this. Here on the left is Dennis Kalovskis, one of the heads behind the Gozi attack. In the center, Viljar Kivi from the infamous Perintäpalvelut scam. And on the right side, we have Yevgeny Bogachev from the Zeus operation. Dennis and Viljar are both in jail. Eugene is still on the loose. He's actually listed on the wanted page by both Europol and Interpol. Apparently, he's wanted for crimes against fashion. And hopefully he'll be caught and will be taken to jail for his crimes. And the internet feeds online crime in two different ways. I mean, you can use the internet to do crime, but you can also collect all the tools you need to do online crime from the internet itself. In fact, it's gotten so bad that you can actually go to YouTube and you'll be faced with ads coming from distributed denial of service networks, which are selling live attacks to you. Let me show you one video ad from YouTube. Almost makes me feel like buying an attack. $3.99 an attack, that's a good deal. Now, that's not a recommendation. Do not go and buy attacks, it's illegal. I'm just telling you that it's fairly easy to find these tools. We have the franchise model of online crime coming from all angles. Today, you don't have to write your own ransom Trojan. You can actually buy a franchise license to ransom attacks as a service. And someone else will write your ransom Trojan for you. And then all you have to do is to, license an exploit kit, have somebody hack some websites for you, put the exploit kit there, infect people's computers, and have them infected with the ransom Trojan, which will then encrypt people's files and ask them to pay bitcoins to get their own files back. This is the reality of today's online crime. And it's no longer just a problem on our computers. The whole society today runs on computers and software. Everything around us is being controlled by computers and software. The lights are on in this building because of computers and software. The lunch you had today was manufactured in a food processing plant run by computers and software. And the traditional way of securing connected devices or industrial control systems or factory automation systems is to keep them offline. That's the way you traditionally secure them. And if you manage to keep them offline, they are actually fairly secure. But it turns out that it's surprisingly hard to keep them offline. We know because we regularly scan the whole internet, or we scan the whole IPv4 address space, which is 4.2 billion IP addresses, and we find stuff online that clearly shouldn't be online. We find things like this. This is somebody's home automation system, somewhere in Germany. He probably configured it by himself because now it's online, which means anybody, including you, can connect to this website and control his lights and his alarm systems and look at his security cameras, which he has everywhere, including in his bedroom. And when we scanned the internet, we found power generators. We found energy plants. We found control systems. We find energy generators. We find dam systems. We find hospital systems. That's 16 hospital beds from a hospital connected with VNC to an open public IP address with no username and password. Everything here is publicly available on the internet if you just know where to go. This is 16 hospital beds. Every bed which has charge on them has a live patient on the bed. This patient isn't doing too well. So clearly we have a problem with our connected devices, with our factories. But then there's also the point that, okay, even if these things are online, who would actually attack them? Would criminals be interested in hacking hospital beds? Well, they might be, but there's probably tons of easier ways for them to make money than to hack hospital beds. So they probably go for easier targets. Well, there's one problem that we have with connected systems, especially critical infrastructure which is online, which is that then we have to start worrying about things like extremists and about crises and foreign aggressive nation states during crises. And we have, in fact, been analyzing governmental malware or attacks coming from various governments for 13 years now. The very first governmental malware cases that we analyzed at F-Secure were in 2003, 13 years ago. And during that time, we have found malware that we, at F-Secure, that we attribute to the Chinese government, to the Russian government, to the United States government, to the German government, to the British government, to Indians, to the Pakistanis, to Iran, to North Korea, and a couple of other countries as well. Israel, yeah, sure, of course. And just today, a couple of hours ago, our colleagues at Kaspersky, the fourth largest security company or antivirus company in the world, coming from Moscow, Russia, they announced their latest research into a governmental malware campaign, which they call Poseidon, which seems to be coming from Brazil. What's interesting about Poseidon is that it's actually targeting satellite systems as part of its command and control infrastructure, which is pretty advanced. We've only seen one malware before, which is targeting satellite systems, and that's a Russian governmental malware called Turla. So as governments moved more and more of their aggressive operations from the real world to the online world, things changed. And most of the governmental action that we see is about espionage. It's not about sabotage. It's not about waging war. It's about stealing information. And this makes sense because information is data. Spies in the old days had to physically go where the information was because the information was on paper. So if you wanted to steal it or copy it, you had to go to the information. Today, you don't have to do that. Today, you can reach almost any system remotely. Cyber arms make sense. They work, they are affordable, and they are deniable. That's why we see more and more developments in this space. And arguably the #1 know-how in building cyber arms in the world is in the United States. The United States has put more money for a longer period of time into researching these things than any other country. Let me actually play you a clip as President Obama is visiting cyber warriors inside NSA headquarters in Fort Meade, Maryland. And he's commenting on Chinese spying attacks against the United States.
And so, for example, I'm going to be getting a visit from President Xi of China, a state visit here coming up in a couple of weeks. We've made very clear to the Chinese that there's certain practices that they're engaging in that we know are emanating from China and are not acceptable. And, you know, we can choose to make this an area of competition, which I guarantee you we'll win if we have to.
We can choose to make this an area of competition, which I will guarantee you we will win if we have to. Very strong, very bold words from the Supreme Commander of the United States military. But like I said, backed up by arguably the best know-how in cyber warfare and cyber arms race. And one particularly good example on what this has led to is that there's now a whole industry of private companies building cyber weapons and cyber arms. Many of the old existing defense contracting companies, especially in the United States, have been moving from traditional building of tanks and fighter jets into building something that they call full spectrum cyber. And full spectrum cyber is a buzzword which means nothing at all. It just sounds cool. But let me play you an example video from one of the largest defense contractor, Northrop Grumman from the United States. This is actually a TV ad for their full spectrum cyber services.
At Northrop Grumman, we've been developing new ways to execute the mission. What once was seen now stays undetected. Where alarms were once raised, now there's silence. With our full spectrum cyber capabilities, our military can eliminate enemy threats at the push of a button. That's the value of performance. Northrop Grumman.
Northrop Grumman. Full spectrum cyber. I don't really know what it means. Honestly, I have no idea. But that's what they advertise. And this is, once again, problematic for us here in Europe. Once again, it's problematic for us here in Europe. The question is, where is the European response? Where is the European software industry? Where is the European software security industry? How come we are unable to compete? How come we are unable to build success stories in software industry? How come we're unable to build what arguably we should be building as such a large provider of goods and services with so many people, with so large budgets? And when we do have the occasional smart young people who have great ideas, who want to do something with their ideas, who want to start new IT startups, the very first thing they do is that they move to Silicon Valley. And then they start their startup in there. And that is something that we really should be doing a better job in. That's exactly what we should be doing. That's the problem we should be fighting. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Mikko. As usual. Well, I have to comment you how we keep these talented, skillful young people with good innovations, how we keep them in Finland or at least in Europe.
There got to be reasons why they leave. Those reasons include easier entrepreneurship cultures, easier ways of setting up companies, easier ways of getting funding, easier taxing, better connections. We have none of that. So yeah, we've had plenty of initiatives to try to solve these problems and to build the European Silicon Valleys, and for various reasons we keep failing over and over again. So there's plenty of obstacles still in the way, and this is clearly showcased by the fact that people still keep leaving. Now, we have some hope. When I look at smart young people of Europe at things like Slush, which would be a perfect example, that gives me hope that we actually have ways of counteracting some of this. But right now, where we are today, we're clearly losing, and that's a sad state of things.
Absolutely. What do you think, Steve? How we keep these skillful young people in Finland or in Europe? What do you say?
I can only agree with what's just been said. I think this is the real crux of the matter, that if you look at, if I were a young person starting up, why wouldn't I go elsewhere? I get more money, an easier environment, lots of bright people around me, less papers to fill in. I think where we go wrong, though, is due to a combination of factors, as Mikko was saying, and we live in a highly fragmented environment, and we seem to find it difficult to get this kind of culture going in a consolidated way. You might be able to do it in one member state. Yeah, doing it across Europe is incredibly challenging, but I agree with the vision. We really have to do this. Yeah, we believe this at ENISA too, but it's even worse than I think was presented, because you need to do it, and then you need to hold on to these guys. Because the second problem we see is we have good companies who start up despite all these obstacles, and then what happens is some big American company comes and buys them out. So it's a very complex problem, and it's largely to do with the way we support and deal with businesses. One last point, by the way, it's very interesting when you look at funding, because think of things like crowdsourcing and venture capital, etc. They work well in the States. For some reason, they don't seem to work quite so well here. So I think we really need to look at this and to find out why, and to come up with better products which are suited to the European mentality. But it's all about growing businesses and providing the right environments. I totally agree.
Then, Mikko, I have to ask you, it was actually Jari Pirhonen who asked in Twitter that how we can make sure that security innovations can keep up with the very fast technological development and innovations what are happening at the moment, meaning that the technology is developing very fast. How security can be taken care of in this development? What do you think?
And the answer is that there's no way to keep up with the security problems. We are building security as an afterthought. We are building it as a later add-on over and over and over again. What we really should be doing is to have better security engineering with the companies that build the various products that we use, so they would be secure from the beginning. There's a perfect example on how we fail to do that with the current IoT boom and all these connected devices, especially household appliances and household devices. When you go and buy a new washing machine or a new television, or soon go and buy a new toaster, they will all be connected to the internet. You can pretty much guarantee that any device which you traditionally connected to your power grid in the future will connect your power grid and to the internet grid. they will all go online. And these existing legacy appliance companies have no existing knowledge of security engineering. They're very good in safety, but they know nothing about security, like cyber or online security or computer security. And the main selling points for washing machines or toasters is not online security. The main selling point is, the color of the washing machine and the size, and of course the price. Price is the most important thing, which means that these appliance makers will invest the minimum amount possible into the security parts of these online devices because it's not a selling point. And then we have to somehow try to secure them afterwards, which is problematic to do, because I can also guarantee to you that you will never be running an antivirus on your toaster. It's never going to happen, I'll guarantee. But we still would have to secure them somehow. So the answer to Jari is that they're not going to be secured out of the box. They have to be secured afterwards with patching and with network level security and some kind of weird gadgets and add-ons, which is not really the ideal way, but the market forces lead us to that way, and it's not going to change.
I have to say that one issue, what comes once again to my mind listening you, we have been discussing quite a lot already in this lecture series, the theme of trust. And we all know that there can't be security without trust and vice versa. And I know that you have been talking for years the trust and the importance of the trust in this digital security, information security. So is it the question that we don't have European options why we use these different softwares and different applications from the United States, even if we know that we are paying the price with our privacy? What do you think? Why we still use?
Trust is a really complicated issue, and it's even more complicated when you think about like how business really works today globally. You can imagine, let's say, a factory in Japan buying gear for their operations. So they're going to buy, computer workstations from American company, because most computers are built by American computer companies. Then they're going to buy PLC boxes to control their factory floor from a German company. Then they're going to buy a security system from a Russian company. Then they're going to buy technology like routers from China. How do they actually trust those different technology parts, which are coming from all over the world, which are coming from potentially hostile nations, if you will? And that's at the core of this question, because it seems that the legacy we are leaving for future generations is that we are building technology based on paranoia instead of building technology based on trust. That's what we really build. Without safety, we can't have security. Without security, we can't have trust. And without trust, we won't have anything at all.
What about you, Steve? I know that in ENISA you are talking quite a lot also about the trust. Can we trust more European solutions than solutions outside Europe? Or is that our objective also here in Europe?
That's a very difficult question. I think some people think you can. I'm not so sure you can. No, ENISA doesn't have a take on this. My personal point of view is we live in a global environment. So I quite often say when talking to people, it doesn't make any sense to think about security within nations' borders. That's for clear, because you connect all over the place. Equivalently, it doesn't really make sense to talk about European security because it's equally connected all over the place. So Mikko is referring to supply chain issues, which we know are there, which are incredibly difficult. I think at least part of the equation is more sensible use of technology. And what is quite interesting is some of the concepts we saw in the past, which worked very well and which we've now dropped, maybe we're bringing back again. Let me give you one example. I personally was involved in a very high-risk banking system, perfect cryptography, really good stuff. You're not going to break this, I can assure you, but you can use it from an internet cafe by design. That was actually design, okay? So I'm okay with that. But think about it, Why am I going to break the crypto if I can stand behind someone at an internet cafe and just look what comes on the screen? So I think how you use systems is really interesting. In the old days, on the IBM terminals, you used to have a source statement, so you could only use the thing from that terminal. We already heard this in
I can hook you up with Tom.
Exactly, So a lot of it, I think, will be adapting ourselves to the world of new technology. If you do all this sexy stuff in your house, perhaps you air gap it from the outside world. I don't know. But we need to behave differently. We don't have to abandon technology. We need to be more sensible and recognize that there are ways of dealing with technology that are different in the next century to now. But I do agree that it would be a shame to go totally paranoid and abandon it because of these risks. That's the wrong way to go, I think.
I think I have a solution for you. We just need 1,000 more Mikkos here in Europe, and the problem is solved. Questions, comments to Steve, Mikko, or comment on these issues?
Thank you very much. Mikko, I think I see a connection that you mentioned about losing the war on privacy with something that Mr. Purser said before you. Please say if you either agree or disagree with me, but by educating or integrating privacy thinking, a sort of common sense from grade school, elementary school, high school levels, we could start waging or even winning this war you're speaking of by installing a mindset, by teaching people from a young age to see the risks where they are and to give them tools and skills how to counter these risks and dangers that lie in the internet and connected devices. Do you agree or disagree?
I completely disagree. Completely disagree. One thing that I've learned during my years in this field is that people never learn anything. You can teach them as many times as you want, and they will always double click on every executable. They will always follow every link. They will always put their password into any field that asks for it. They will never learn. Education is a waste of time. How's that? Yes, I'm being a bit sarcastic. It would be pretty grim future if we really wouldn't believe that education matters, especially considering that this lecture is inside a university, which is trying to educate people. But education is hard. And even when we do it right, and you're absolutely correct, we should start it from grade school, from as young as possible. But even when you do it right, the practical solutions still matter. So even if people know that, okay, for example, Facebook will track me through my surfing and will follow what I'm interested in, even on pages which have nothing to do with Facebook, because I have Facebook cookie in my browser, and all these pages have the Facebook like button, which means they can connect my visit to that page back to my Facebook identity. Even if they know that, it's still really hard to avoid it in practice. Practical things are hard. Like, try to avoid Google. We all know Google is problematic from privacy point. I think we all like Google from their products. I love Google products. I think the products are really, really good. I like Google's products. I don't like how I pay for them. I'd love to pay for them with money instead of paying with my privacy, but I can't. So the only option that I have left is to avoid Google. And I can tell you that you can't do it. You can't avoid Google. Even if you try to, you will not be able to avoid Google. I know because I've tried. I mean, you can try to avoid the Google search engine and use, DuckDuckGo or Startpage or Yahoo. You can try to use something else instead of the search engine. They won't be as good, but you'll get by. But then that's not all of it. I mean, there's all the other services, and you can avoid Gmail and Google Maps because they have alternatives. But there's tons of content on Google Blogger sites and Blogspot sites, which you can't get from anywhere else except visiting a Google property. And what are you going to do when someone sends you a link to a funny video which is on YouTube? Like, what are you going to do? You will go and watch the video on YouTube. I mean, there's no other alternative. So you cannot avoid Google. So even when we educate perfectly well, we still don't have much choices in practical lives in avoiding this kind of surveillance and this kind of wholesale gathering of our private information, which is the #1 way of making money online today. Google's profits last year were $12 billion, which is pretty good considering that they give away the product. You pay nothing to Google, yet they made $12 billion in profit. Not bad.
I think it's good business idea. Paying nothing and get that kind of revenues.
There's an even better business idea. a business idea which is better than Google's, which is pretty good. And that's the ransom Trojan guys, because we've tracked some of the Bitcoin blockchain wallets of these ransom Trojan guys, and Crypto Wall, a gang from Moscow. We've seen from their blockchain transactions that they've made more than 300 million with ransom Trojans, which is pretty well. I mean, our revenue is 150 million a year. They make 300 million, so clearly we're in the wrong business. And it's tax-free, because you don't pay tax for ransoms. So.
But that is not something what F-Secure will do, right?
I make no future-looking statements. As a publicly listed company, you should know that.
Yes. Comments, other questions? Let's take one more. Please.
We have maybe 1 billion of intelligent people, more or less, against some big companies who have still less resources than these 1 billion intelligent people together. Couldn't you deliver a tool for each of these 1 billion people, and then we are stronger than Google and other guys who are trying to steal from us? Can we be at the equal level with them handling our data, selling our data, not giving for free if you provide us tools to be strong?
The question is simple and it's very hard to answer. Like, can we solve this problem with technology? This problem was created by technology. Can we solve it with technology? In theory, we can. In practice, it's going to be goddamn hard. It's going to be goddamn hard to make people change the way they operate online. I mean,
you offer them a tool, and they play with it without knowing how it works.
All right. So the way to make this work is that people can continue using the internet just like they've used it before, but they would somehow now doing it more securely. And I suppose the closest equivalent into that we actually have out there, and when I say we have, I mean we as F-Secure we have, would be our hybrid VPN solutions. And I know that some of you guys are probably running, some of you guys and girls are probably running, and gentlemen and ladies are probably running Freedom, which is our hybrid VPN, which is pretty close to that. Like once you install it to your smartphone or tablet or computer, it's invisible. I mean, it's somewhere in the background, but it sort of gives you those kind of benefits. It's clearly reducing tracking. It's removing third-party cookies. It's removing aggressive tracking elements from your browsing. It's making you anonymous online without you doing anything at all. You click one button and then you forget about it. And that's the kind of solutions we really have to be developing if we want to be able to make people use the solutions. So I agree.
I say that we give a big hand to Mr. Steve Purse from ENISA and Mikko Hyppönen from F-Secure.